So I think it's important for us today to focus on a serious historical, sociological treatment of one of the main plagues in our society, something that plagues and can plague every African American, every person of color, every oppressed person, every mentally ill person, every poor person, and that's police brutality, police harassment, police humiliation, police terrorism, police murder. The case of Jordan Neely, it was a week ago. This is a young man who made a living, tried to eke out a living on the subways of our city, impersonating Michael Jackson. He's lived in the streets. He's been homeless for years. Some of the background information on this young man, his mother was murdered in a particularly brutal fashion. And when his mother was murdered, forgive these gory, horrific details, but when we talk about mental illness is one of the main themes here. And as we came into class today, as you walk down Grand Concourse or 149th Street or 138th Street, just on your way to class today, how many mentally ill people did you see? How many people struggling to eat, to find shelter? Mental illness is endemic to a society that doesn't care about our people, that is racist, that is profit driven. It's not about people's needs. So in a way, it's very difficult to even relate to what Jordan Neely had survived prior to being murdered by this wannabe RoboCop, violent, hyper-masculine Marine, Penny. This guy Penny from Queens, who was in the Marines for some 5 years or so, he choked him to death last week on the train. Well, Neely's mother's body was found, I believe it was in 2012, in a suitcase here in the Bronx. Just to give you an indication of the level of trauma, generational, historical trauma that the Black community, that all oppressed communities are dealing with. So every time we take the 2 train, every time we take the 5 train, 4 train, D train, A train, BX19 bus, we come across people who are struggling to get through the day, get through the week, scrounge up something to eat. And what does our society do with the vast majority of mentally ill people? Does anyone want to take a guess? Where are our most mentally ill people in our society? Where do they end up?
Are they in prison?
Streets.
In prison, in the streets, sometimes psychiatric institutions, which usually hold them for 72 hours, if that. So many of these police encounters have to do with this huge theme of mental illness. I mean, it seems like yesterday I was teaching at Metropolitan College of New York, and the NYPD came into the projects in Soundview, and Deborah Banner, I believe was her name, mentally ill, older woman, and I think she had taken off her clothes, and this is a 65-year-old woman, a Black woman. What does the NYPD do? They guns ablaze, they shoot her, they murder her, and they said that she was a threat. So the national statistics in terms of the murder of Black people, it's every 28 hours that a Black person in this country, Black women, Black children, Black men, Black LGBTQ, it's every 28 hours that a Black person is killed by law enforcement, or in this case, with this coward Penny, it was a case of vigilantism, where he claimed that he was trying to, keep other people safe. But every witness said that Jordan Neely was very upset. He was pacing on. This is what we see every day. I mean, welcome to New York City. How many people have to live on the trains? Y'all remember at the height of the coronavirus, how many tens of thousands of homeless people were forced to live on the trains before they were violently cleared out by the NYPD. So I want to take this horrific latest tragedy and put it into some type of societal, systemic context, because it is systemic. It's predictable, it's periodic. We'll hear every liberal mayor say after what happened to George Floyd, it's almost 3 years to the day. I believe it was May 22nd, in 20 that George Floyd was brutally tortured and murdered. And now, what's the difference with Jordan Neely? So it's not a question of when will this happen or if this will happen again. This will continue to happen again. This is what this society produces. Always come back to Malcolm X's analysis that a chicken cannot lay a goose egg. This society cannot produce peace and social harmony for the vast majority of our people. So in your high school training and college training and your entire formal education training, did anyone ever teach you about the state? What's the state? Does anyone want to try to adventure a guess, a definition of the state? What's the state?
Are you referring to like just government programs, how things are run like within the state?
Mm-hmm. When I'm talking about the state, and I kind of expected some of the blank stares, but that was certainly, that could be part of it. That could be another definition, but the definition I want to give you, make sure you get it down in your notes, is the organized repression of one social class by another social class. The state is an organized apparatus of armed bodies used to enforce the will of those in power. Well, who's in power? The Bronx is not in power. The people are not in power. We know who's in power. The Bloombergs and the Rupert Murdochs and the billionaires. And will you ever see a police encounter with a rich person? Would a police ever go, guns ablaze, to the downtown, to the financial district, to Tribeca, to Wall Street, and treat people like this? Of course not. But it's guns ablaze, it's batons ablaze all day, every day in our communities. And many of you are traumatized, whether you experienced it or you witnessed it happening to others, because you really can't walk a day in our communities without seeing this. One interesting fact that came up, Jordan Neely had been arrested some 44 times. For what? Because he didn't have money to get on the subway. 44 arrests because he was poor and black. And now they're trying to put the subways up from $2.75 to $3. And they know a certain percentage of people can't afford that. And that's a fresh pool of black and brown and poor bodies they can put into Rikers Island, they can put into central booking. This is a system where you can actually trade and invest in private prisons. This system is so sick that they prefer to invest in private prisons and in the warehousing of black and brown youth instead of investing in a true education, a relevant education, dignified employment opportunities. So again, this is all too predictable, the way these things are playing out. Our entire lives, we've been told from CNN and Fox News and the New York Times and Facebook that the police are there in case there's a kitty cat that is stuck in a tree. And the police are there to get the bad guys and the murderers and the rapists. But the facts indicate otherwise. Somewhere between 85 to 95% of people who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, crimes of poverty. And until you've been hungry, until you've been down and out, until you've been jobless, so many people out there across this country want to judge the Jordan Neelys. They want to judge the George Floyds. They're going to go and vilify. In Spanish, you say satanizar, to satanize or demonize these human beings who should be alive today, whose only crime was they were black and poor in America. So the state exists to keep property relations, which we can think about as a socio-economic pyramid, very, very few, a minuscule amount of billionaires on top, the vast majority of us somewhere here in the bottom, whether we're poor working class or super alienated. There's different degrees to it. And the more marginalized, the more socially alienated you are, the higher the risk. But every day we see this, just based off of personal experience, me, who I grew up with, and my friends, and this is coming from a white man, right? I can't tell you how many times the police se burlaron de nosotros. They made fun of us. They mocked us, with knees in our back. And it never felt like they were there to protect us. And I think for the majority of white people in this country, though poor whites have caught hell too, certainly not at the rates that Native Americans, Latinos, and blacks, and we should look at those, per 1 million or per 1,000 inhabitants. The likelihood of a black person being killed by the police is 4, 5, 6 times higher than a white person. And for Native Americans, believe it or not, it's even higher historically. So the state exists to protect the interests of those in power. That's a scientific definition of the state that if a high school teacher was to give you that, they'd probably be fired, tomorrow. And these are the types of empowering critical education that we want to share with young people, so you can make some type of sense out of really the senselessness of a brutal, violent, white supremacist society. You know how many people are sitting back watching Fox, watching Breitbart, reading the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Journal, and applauding what this cowardly Marine did? First they go over and abuse Iraqis and occupy Afghanis and slaughter Libyans and Palestinians. Then they come back and exercise that same hatred, that same violence, that same vehemence, that same white supremacy on people here. So there's a definitive connection between different branches of the state. Again, organized, armed bodies of control. We're talking about the NYPD. We're talking about the National Guard. We're talking about the correction officers in Rikers. These are all the different branches of the state that exist, in the words of Ice Cube and NWA, to serve, protect, and break a black man's neck. So you might get some liberal tears from MSNBC where they say it's so wrong what happened to George Floyd, we can't bear to see this. And you might get slight reforms. We can call this liberalism, we can call this reformism. You'll see Joe Biden, Kamala Harris do a little corny press conference and try to invite the family of Jordan Neely or George Floyd as they did 3 years ago. But nothing systematically changes. To go back to the teachings of Malcolm X, what do liberals or Democrats represent in this society? We can think of it as a knife in the neck of black America, a knife in the neck of working class America. And what Malcolm X said is that the liberals want to extract that knife. They want to pull out that knife an inch or two as the knife continues to bleed our communities. Now, the Republicans, the most openly fascist and vitriolic, they want to plunge that knife in even deeper to the neck of oppressed communities. So that's one way to think of Democrats versus Republicans and how they approach these, huge issues. Tweedledee, Tweedledum, as the Haitian compatriots say. They say the two wings of the same vulture that devours us. I have a light socket here. Democrats, Republicans, you have a Democratic vote. You can stick your index finger into the first socket or the second socket. In the words of Vladimir Lenin, the elections in a capitalist society, we have the democratic right to every 4 years choose our oppressors. And with elections coming up next year in November again, it looks like Trump or DeSantis or another racist versus another cowardly liberal like Joe Biden. What type of democratic choice? Regardless of who wins, we lose. And all this discourse about reform on the police, again, is laid bare that it's nothing more than rhetoric. It's nothing more than blah, blah, blah. It's built into the very fabric of this system. The Washington Post has an ongoing database to document every police murder. According to the Post, in the last 12 months, there's been 1,069 police murders in this country. I would double, triple, quadruple that. I mean, what does the Washington Post know about what black people and Native people go through every day in this country? There's another statistic here from Mapping Police Violence. So far in this year, 254 people have been cut down by the police. But again, it's something systematic. There's rallies across New York City. It's another George Floyd-esque moment. We saw people in a very courageous way, shut down the train system these past few days, risking injury to themselves, going down on to the train tracks to stop the MTA. And as the contradictions intensify, as the U.S. continues to look for more war with Russia, more war with China, more war with South American nations like Nicaragua, Cuba, Bolivia, Venezuela, they send $150 billion for this proxy war against Russia with the Ukrainian working class trapped in the middle. That's $150 billion that could go to families like ours that need healing and that deserve healing. There's no resources for mentally ill communities. I've been a witness too many times when the NYPD, someone who's having an acute mental health crisis, you know what they do? They call backup and they surround him and they try to provoke him or her and they wait. And of course, that's just going to make a mentally ill person, especially black or brown person, even more afraid. And that's the NYPD tactic, so they can then throw them into Rikers Island. I've witnessed it. You all have witnessed it. You all have lived it. So the only solution, in my opinion, having studied this now, and more importantly than studying it, being in the streets with this mass movement, nothing in U.S. history has been the spark to the prairie fire of resistance, black fire, resistance across the board, multinational resistance and unity. Nothing has been a spark more than police brutality. If you look at every rebellion, the Watts Rebellion, the Newark Rebellion, the Detroit Rebellion, it was always sparked by the assassination of Martin Luther King and Malcolm, those things as well. But at its heart, it was always white supremacists, state police, mistreatment, humiliation, murder of black and brown communities.